Hi everyone, I'm Alex Turner from thebusinessdesk.com and welcome to our next session, Creating a Culture of Disruption. And I hope you're all enjoying the Disruptors conference so far this morning. Businesses with the capacity to disrupt need a culture of innovation, but they also need a culture which can evolve as the company grows and matures. Equally, companies that have been forced into being disruptive, whether from COVID, competition, or other challenges, must find a way to maximize the opportunities. Having and keeping the right talent and skills in the business and building diverse and resilient teams with fantastic leaders is the key to success, but it is also extremely difficult with the current war for talent. Helping me today to find some answers to these issues are our three panelists, and I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Jackson, Client Innovation Manager at Mills Reeve, Lee Marples, Partner at Design Agency Think 3, and Matt Jones, Director of Online Learning Business Oxbridge, and a previous winner of our Midlands Leadership Awards. Welcome all. Just before we get started, just a reminder to everyone in the audience, do join in the session chat and share any questions that you have for our panelists, and I will weave those in as we go through the next 40 minutes or so. So to kick us off, if I could come to you first, Matt, what would you say is the biggest challenge for creating a culture of disruption?
I think it's, culture is clearly very important. It's been a buzzword for a long time now for a reason. I think in terms of biggest challenges, I think there's a really recent challenge that we've all started to experience, and that is creating culture during COVID. We've all got employees or teammates that we've not met. It's that whole adage, isn't it, that some of them are taller and shorter than you expected them to be. But also that culture fit doesn't always come across via a Zoom call. So actually, we're finding the challenge at the moment is resetting that culture and making sure that all of the team are on the same page. So that's something that's a bit of a new challenge for I think the whole employment industry, really.
Yeah, Lee, what's your experience been?
We're still a relatively new business in terms of sort of where we're at, not even 3 years old yet. So sort of for us, that culture, as Matt was saying, was an integral part of what we were trying to do. And I think sort of our level of disruptfulness, if you want to call it, on the back of that was actually down to the people that we built, that we brought into the team as it's gone on. Now, I think the challenge for us will be going forward about what does that continued growth look like, and how do you continue to still find people that have the same approach and the same mentality in terms of what you're trying to achieve as a business that fit in with that, because clearly with growth comes challenges, and the more people that you've got and trying to continue that sense of disruptfulness, whatever that looks like, and that can be as simple as just doing it in a slightly different way to anybody else, that still has an impact, and finding those right people in the right location is going to be the key thing for us. And as a creative agency, we're not massive fans of the remote working model. It's all about collaboration, and you can only do that with a whiteboard and a set of pens and scribbling stuff down, which we can't do over Zoom very well.
I don't think my team are missing me standing at a whiteboard and drawing a big spider diagram. But Emma, what do you see as being the biggest challenge?
So, we've powered through with the virtual whiteboards and, Post-it notes here and there. And we've all got Post-its at home. But I agree, a lot of it is around culture. So I'm in a technology team, but I'm not in a technology company. So I work at a law firm. And we have worked really hard to try and make a culture of disruption and innovation. And that the biggest barrier always is the fact that lawyers are actually quite risk averse. So they don't like to fail at anything. Whereas we need that in order to grow on our side of things. So it's actually a real education piece for the rest of the wider business around how we're doing things in innovation and approaching it with a different mindset than what they're used to.
And I think mindset's such a key word, isn't it? Because whether it's more senior people who are risk averse, as you say, Emma, or more junior people who perhaps don't have the confidence to put forward new ideas. How do you go about Matt? Perhaps not stymieing people's entrepreneurial or innovative thoughts.
Well, I think just touching on what Emma just said, actually, about lawyers don't like to fail. Well, yeah, I suppose the outcome is you either win or you lose in your industry, Emma. But the thing is, it's all about giving people permission to fail as well. And disruption can only really happen if people get things right and wrong. And it's, again, it goes back to people have said it for hundreds and thousands of years about, people, you learn from mistakes. And I think as long as those mistakes aren't too catastrophic, and I think we're a bit, none of us are running nuclear power stations. So ultimately, we can get some things wrong. And a lot of the best innovations and the best disruption comes from getting some things wrong, because then you figure out what's right.
Definitely. So we have a kind of ethos of probes, prototypes, and pilots, and the probes are where we can afford to get things wrong, and they'll be looked at maybe internally, maybe with a few clients, to see if it's the right thing to do. It's only then that we'll go to the sort of prototyping and then ultimately pilot if it's something that's going to be successful. But it's really that kind of first bit that gets me excited anyway, where we can actually go and try things out and see what works and what doesn't.
That's where you end up with the crazy drawings on the whiteboard. It's fantastic.
It is, yeah. That's the fun bit.
I think in our opening session, Ed from Deloitte talked about falling in love with the problem. And I think very much about embracing, identifying and embracing what the problem is, and then really getting stuck into it. Lee, it's a relatively young business. How do you get everybody on board with that idea of falling in love with the problem and wanting to get stuck into those difficult questions?
I think for us, that was about giving people the opportunity to literally have open forum with anything. So one of the things I know we're conscious to do when we relocated in the middle of lockdown into a new home that was 6 times bigger than we had before, which was daft, some people thought, because we moved into a city centre, bizarrely. But when we were sort of setting this place up, we made sure actually we got those sort of areas where people could go and just sit down on the sofa, just have conversations. And we've always said to anybody, whether they're new recruits or even existing people that have been with us since the beginning, that there are no wrong answers in this. If there's a problem to be solved, and for us as a creative agency or web build or whatever we're doing, whether it's marketing or anything, there's always going to be a problem somewhere that we are trying to be the people that can fix. And therefore, no idea is a bad idea if you can justify what you're trying to say and ultimately how that's going to impact ultimately on the client for us. So it's about making sure right from day one, part of that induction process that we have with the staff is actually that they're welcomed in, they're embraced in terms of being able to come up with stupid answers, because no answer is stupid if it delivers the results at the end.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that can be key is the knowledge that underpins people's ideas and thoughts. How well do you think the workforce in general is in having the right sort of technical knowledge from kind of technology point of view to think of what's next and how do we solve something in an innovative way? Lee?
At the minute, I think we're probably struggling on the ground. I think it's probably fair to say in terms of sort of expectations, where for us as employers, I think the world's moved very quickly in the last 18 months, 2 years, faster than probably anybody expected it to. And education landscape, those coming out of school at 16, those A levels, they're not yet keeping up with the pace that where we're looking for now going forward. So whereas there always used to be a challenge between sort of academic ability versus work experience on CVs, actually now you're trying to look further ahead as to what is the next 2 years going to look like in terms of how these roles are going to develop and how are ultimately our customers developing at the same time, and how can we then find the right people to bring in with that skill set ultimately. And I don't think necessarily the education landscape is supporting how fast that's moving. So you have a sort of a very generic set of skills that come out. So actually what you're looking for now in people is that differential that makes them stand out to be different than anybody else. And I think we've seen it with some of the Zoom interviews. That's hard. Actually, what you need with some of these people is to bring them in for half an hour and just see how they fit in with everybody else. And you can only do that in bringing them in for a proper face-to-face conversation. And for us, we don't do interviews. We just do a chat and coffee, and we'll figure it out from that point, because it is more ultimately about, are they the right people that can fit in with the rest of the team and deliver the right results?
Matt, obviously you're in the education space, and a different part than the schools and universities, so in a position to be, I suppose, more responsive to demand. How do you view things at the moment?
Well, I'm still impressed that Lee managed to move offices during lockdown, which just goes to prove that every bad thing that happens, there's always an opportunity in there. So I think that's really important. That's part of a good disruptive culture. I think in terms of the landscape at the moment, I actually agree with everything Lee's just said. Is that well, firstly, we do that first 30-minute chat, and I think even now potential team members, people that are coming for interviews, find it a bit jarring. So I haven't got a CV in front of me in the first stage. What I'm actually looking for is what could I spend 8 hours or more a day with that person? And I think that's more important now than it ever has been. We ultimately we're busier than we've ever been, and skills on a CV are okay, but there's so much more now. We get into things like emotional intelligence and all kinds of things like that. That whole debate about IQ versus EQ. And I think these days, EQ is, for me personally, more important. Being in a sector where I can teach people and upskill people, I know I can do that, but emotional intelligence is not something that is easy to teach. So for me, that disruptive culture comes from some really disruptive people, but in a positive way. We're not talking about people that are being insubordinate or anything like that. We're talking about people that want to challenge and challenge respectfully.
Emma, I think that the legal sector is full of people who like to challenge and challenge respectfully. But how do you think a sector like yours and the professional services sector more generally, how well adapted are they to technology and what that the opportunities that presents?
We're getting there. So there's still a lot more opportunities that can be taken advantage of. It all tends to come down to time and budget on what gets picked up and what doesn't. Following on from what you were just said, our team itself, so Mills Reeve obviously has been around quite a long time, I would say. But the innovation team has only been 3 years in the making, and it started with just me. As of Monday, there's 10 of us. And apart with one exception, which I'll tell you about in a second, everybody has moved internally in the business. So we haven't externally recruited anybody. So these aren't people who work in IT, although I was. It's people who were admin assistants and secretaries and executive assistants, some lawyers, and they've actually moved into our area because the culture fits. They were interested in what we were doing and they showed an attitude to it. The exception is that we have actually run an innovation and projects trainee grad scheme, where we have successfully put two people have gone through that 2-year program, and they've actually stayed on in the team. And we're just advertising for the September intake at the moment. So we're hoping to take on 2 more as well. And we found that's a really good route to find people who are interested and have a different way of thinking than obviously our ingrown team who've come up through the business.
What particularly were you looking for from those trainees, and what skills have you sought to develop over that 2-year period?
So they've one of them has come from a STEM background and one is languages graduate. And they have both shown an interest in project management initially, but innovation is anything new that adds value to us or our clients, to us as a business. So actually everybody can be involved in innovation, and they have led some of the biggest projects. So one of them's actually gone into app development for us, which is fantastic, and they both manage technology projects for the business as well.
And I suppose that comes on to a broader theme of, it's important that, innovation isn't just delivered by people with technical backgrounds, but there's a real diverse group who bring different experiences and backgrounds and knowledge to a challenge. Matt, how do you ensure that that you do build a diverse team that doesn't end up becoming sort of mini-me's of Matt, or for example?
What a horrendous thought. I think there's a few things to say on this point, actually, is that, there's a lot said about diversity these days, but I think it's absolutely key. And I'm a big fan of building what I would call a prickly team. So, there's all sorts of conversations that can be had around diversity, but what I'm specifically looking for is, not necessarily a tech background. So I'll get back onto that in a second, but what I'm looking for when I'm building a team is I don't need people to like each other in a team. I just need people to respect each other. And actually, when people have got quite opposing thoughts on a matter, it tends to pull you back quite nicely to a centre ground. So actually, when I'm putting teams together, I'm not looking for a load of, with respect, geeks. I'm not looking for a load of tech people because we all have a certain way of thinking about things and everything's quite step-by-step programmatical. But actually, what I want is people that think differently. And, there's a big movement at the moment. I'm sure it's countrywide, but especially in Birmingham, to get arts and tech together. And I think that's a really fantastic prospect. And I think that's quite an obtuse example that gives you quite an idea. But I'm looking for essentially building a prickly team. And that just means that we're going to get some really fantastic ideas. People are going to challenge each other respectfully, but we're also going to be exploring new avenues. And the last thing I would want when I'm building a team is everyone to agree on the same thing. I think that goes back to the army as well. I think there's a few methodologies from the army where you're not all allowed to agree on the same thing. And it has to be challenged, every decision challenged respectfully again. But I think so. Prickly teams is the one for me. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, Emma, I can see you smiling at prickly teams. Is that because you like the term or because you have one?
I quite like the term, to be honest. It's a really good way of thinking about it, but it is really important that things are challenged. With what we do, so we'll work with some lawyers and their clients, and we'll try and design a system or a solution or a process even. And it's really important that we do challenge, because quite often you can go down an alley where you're trying to fix a problem that isn't the actual problem. It's just a surface. So it's really getting down to what the actual problem is in the first place. It might actually be something really simple that you can just, throw an Excel spreadsheet template at, or something that basic that actually causes an awful lot of headaches, one after the other. So I do quite like prickly teams. I'm gonna take that one back to the office.
And Lee, how do you think the digital and creative sector is performing in terms of broadening participation?
I think it's doing all right. I think, aren't we one of the sort of main leading sectors at the minute in terms of vacancies? So we're still growing at a rate better than probably many others at the minute. So I think we must be doing something right. I think probably the big challenge now is going to be around how do you sort of maintain that, I think, because there's a lot of skill shortages that we've got in both digital and creative sectors across the board. And we've got both sides of that with our business. Then I think the third element, which sort of ties a little bit into that, is that the disruptiveness is around actually understanding the reasons why. I mean, that's always one of my favorite questions that I'll always ask is why? Why is that the answer? Why are we doing this? Why is this the right way over something else? I think, as Emma said, actually, it's about finding those underlying problems and what that looks like. And if it is something simple, it comes back to sort of tying it back into whatever the client's ultimate goals are for what you're trying to achieve. And you can only answer that by asking the daft questions, which I have no issues in asking at all and making myself look like a fool sometimes, but you have to do that. And I will do that with our tech guys, because I don't get it. I don't have to understand it. I can be there to translate. So I think in terms of sort of where we are as a sector across the board, the biggest issue right now is this competitive advantage, I think, over recruitment. And what does that look like? And how do you maintain the right skills in the business and the really good people? So whilst we're hitting that plethora of diversity in all sorts of guises and shapes and forms of across the board in different roles, it's now, okay, well, how do you maintain that? Because as we've seen, salaries for some of these roles have gone ridiculous in the last 12 months. And I think for us in our sector specifically, you can't pass that on to a client. It's not justified in that way. So actually you have to sort of absorb those costs or innovate further and try and find alternative ways to continually sort of bring in the revenues each month. So it's not easy, but a good thing at the same time. Must be.
Let's hope so. Matt, how have you found the recruitment challenge over the last 18 months? And are you doing anything differently than you were at the start of 2020?
I think recruitment at the moment is a big challenge for every business. I'm sure we've all experienced it that, as Lee said, salaries are sky high at the moment. And actually, you're paying 30%, 30% more for the same person that you would have done maybe 6 months ago. So that is a really big challenge at the moment. I think there's a wider piece here actually with recruitment. Jobs for life, that's not a thing anymore. You're not in a job for a decent amount of time. And I think there's a real big argument here to say that, look, are we the caretakers of somebody's career for a few years now, and we let them move on? I'm a big believer in, look, that somebody's got to be responsible for skills development. And I think, that's that's probably another webinar in itself, but somebody's got to be responsible. Now, at Oxbridge, I put the person, I make them responsible for their own learning and development. Now, Oxbridge supports them really heavily. There's a whole load of things that we do, but they're responsible, and that's key for me. Now, we'll bring someone on board. They may or may not have the right skills. I can teach skills. That's not a difficult thing. Well, it's fairly difficult, but it's not the most difficult thing when you're recruiting. And I think we have to understand these days that people just don't stay in jobs for all that long. Now, there's an argument. I know that potentially sounds counterintuitive, but I celebrate that. If I can't help someone develop past what I can offer them, then we shake hands and we help them on their way to their next role. And I think having that mindset changes things drastically. Even when you're interviewing, when I'm interviewing, I'm looking for high performance people, and high performance people are always wanting more. They want to do something. They always need something else. And perhaps that something else isn't at Oxbridge, but look, I can't treat everyone like they're going to last 10 years because they're probably not. That approach tends to mean that people do stay longer here than they normally would, because they're feeling like they're developing, and we're really open and honest about that development plan as well. So when someone comes in, we agree a 3, 6, 12-month plan, and even a bit longer. People struggle to think a bit longer than 12 months, but we look at what that person's personal goals are and try and fit in their personal development to match with those personal goals. I think that's really powerful. But what I'm not looking for when I'm hiring these days is someone that's going to be here 10, 20 years, because that just doesn't exist anymore. And I think a lot of companies are still asking the wrong questions at interview. And some of those questions can be along the lines of, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, not with you, mate. So, and I think we just need to be realistic. My hope is that we spend time, effort and money on developing people's skills. And I hope that other businesses around here as well, especially, are doing the same thing, because I think it's our joint responsibility as a set of employers to do that these days, because no one else is. And the feeding in from education, I know we'll probably get onto that shortly, but it's a bit of a broken system at the moment, and it's certainly in flux. Sorry, I rambled on a little bit there, but I think the point being is that that skills are teachable, but being a decent human isn't necessarily something you can change all that much.
Indeed. Emery, in terms of that idea of jobs for life, I mean the professional services sector, in theory, obviously people used to have more or less the same job for life, even if they might move firms. But how much is technology disrupting it? And in terms of your newly qualified and your younger lawyers, do they view the world differently, or are they imagining that in 20 years' time they'll basically still be doing the same thing in the same way?
I don't think they're imagining that at all. It is very different now, even than when I started my career. So I mean, I've been at Mills Reeve for 16 years, so I'm one of those lifers, I'm afraid. But I haven't done the same job for 16 years. I started as a secretary, and I actually worked in IT on the service desk and as an IT trainer for 10 years, where I was the only female in an all-male IT team for the entire duration of my decade service. And then moved across to the innovation side of things. And I think it is that personal development. So they very much put me in charge of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to progress. And that is the reason that I'm still there, because they have given me opportunities to go into initially projects. And then because of my tech background, I got all the shiny, nice projects. And then that has turned into innovation. So it is that way. Whereas with the lawyer group, it's slightly different in that they, once they've done their training contract, quite a lot do stay with us initially, at least. But there does seem to be more of a turnover around that. But it is just the way of the world now. As you say, not everybody works somewhere for 16 years. Although I'm by no means the longest serving. We've just had somebody who had a 50-year anniversary of working at the firm. So
that's impressive. I've clocked up 7 years as of today at the business desk, but I'm struggling to imagine 2054.
Do you know what, though? Emma and I haven't spoken about this prior to this discussion, but Emma's a classic example of why, when you put somebody's self-development in their own hands, it works. And clearly at Mills Reeve, they've got that, they understand that. And you've developed from through several roles, Emma, and that's really exciting. So that just backs up the point I made about you put it in the person's hands and you're not worried about them leaving. And you're actually thinking, well, I mean, what's more dangerous than you leaving, you staying and not being skilled up? That's far more dangerous. So I think that's a really interesting point.
Definitely, and it's far less productive as well, to be honest. Whereas actually letting people take the courses that they want to take and pick on the things. So it's really about choosing the area that suits you best, as well as what suits the business. I mean, obviously, they're not going to let me go and learn to fly a plane, but they, as long as it's a mutual benefit, they've been really supportive from the beginning, to be honest. And that's what I love about it. That's why I like my job, to be honest. It's because I've been able to mould it into what I have wanted it to be.
And that's why you've stayed 16 years.
It is. It's probably why I'll be here another 16 as well.
Lee, when you're recruiting at the moment, what are the skills and characteristics that you're looking for beyond the job spec?
Is that something different, and it's quite hard to try and explain. So I'll give you an example of our sort of latest recruit who's coming on an internship. So there's a bit of PR that went out about this, but a young lad at the university, he'd done his background checks on who he wanted to work with in the creative sector. He'd sort of picked us out as being one of his favourites to do it. So one day I was walking into the office, and we've got about 3 different ways that we can come into the office. So the lad had done his research on this. He'd then been out and stuck QR codes up on lampposts covering every access point towards the office, one for each of the 3 of us that own Think3, a generic one then on the front doorstep, whereas we were walking in and basically put QR code on there. He looked at our clients, who we'd worked with, done some ideas and pulled himself a bit of a portfolio together based on us actually as a business. And I got him in there and then that afternoon. He came in and we offered him a job within 2 weeks. So it's the little things like that where I think, because you do see so many CVs flying through your desk and speculative emails that land in an inbox that you just sit down and you think, I'll look at that later. And actually you don't get around to it. So sometimes you probably can easily miss the good ones, but the really good ones are the ones that actually stand out in a different way. And I guess that's what we're looking for. And that's part of that disruptfulness, isn't it? It's about somebody's made the effort there to go and do something different and stand out. And actually, well, why wouldn't we use those sorts of skills and tactics that somebody's got for our clients and do that in exactly the same way? Because that's exactly what we're trying to do.
And how do you approach nurturing somebody like that who is presumably quite raw, but is able to think like that? How do you make sure that they continue with that really imaginative approach?
Giving them the opportunities to do it. That's what it comes down to. Like I said earlier, there's no idea is a bad idea. So actually, what we always will make sure is actually as part of sort of campaign planning sessions and things like that, that everybody has their say and their input into what it could look like. And those ideas aren't ones that just appear within a 30-minute scheduled meeting. It's the stuff that's constantly on the go and you're always thinking about stuff. So, I mean, we use all the tools you can think of, the Slack and Dropbox and everything. So actually there's that many different places for these ideas to be dropped and sort of stored for later dates. And it's then about working out, well, that's a great idea, but how does that best fit to somebody then that we're working with, and then sort of pitching those ideas to them. And then it's about the right client and the right fit. So you've got to give them the freedom, I think, to be able to sort of express themselves more so in a creative type role than technical, which is more sort of process led and driven behind it. But definitely in the creatives, they've got to be given the time and the opportunity to just think in a different way to other people. And we do have that challenge internally where you've got a creative bunch who like to think versus sort of a technical bunch who are sort of process led and everything is done in a set way. When you bring those two together, that's quite challenging sometimes. And they just don't get how it all fits together, which is why I sit nicely in the middle and mediate.
Matt, also as a business owner, how do you approach giving people the freedom and time that Lee was just talking about to make mistakes, to explore ideas, potentially to explore an idea and then decide that it's not right and to start again? How do you approach that?
So it is difficult, and it's a difficult one as a founder to be able to let go of things and not be in control of every nuance of what goes on in this business. I think ultimately that's one limiting factor to growth. So that's something I'm really mindful of. So I think it goes back to, and to carry on from Lee's point, which is it's about permission to fail. It's okay to get it wrong. As long as it's not something you do maliciously, it's okay to have a go and it not be right. Whether that be something as simple as somebody writing an email that's got to go out to everyone, and it not really being in tone of voice and anything like that. Look, ultimately, as long as it's not going to do damage, it's not the end of the world. And I think as managers, leaders, at any level, we have to understand that not everyone thinks the same as us. And it goes back to that diversity piece as well. The four of us will undoubtedly write an email in different ways. And, I think it's okay to fail is the first thing. But secondly, you've got to allow people to own it as well. Now, that's a really big phrase that's used here at Oxbridge, is own it. In fact, it's so important. It's written on the wall in neon. And what that's talking about is if you see something, you're responsible, and that's it now. It's all about accountability. So it might be that you see a problem. I don't know. There's something wrong with the electrics, for example. Now, most people aren't going to know how to fix that or be qualified to fix that, but they then need to own it and go and find someone that can. And I think that goes at all levels. So, permission to fail again, but owning it all the way through that process as well is really important.
Yeah, talking of signs on the wall, it reminded me of I did an office tour of Gymshark when they first moved into Gymshark HQ, and they are a very big fan of having messages on the wall in very big letters. The two that stick with me is they've got a little gym area and it says "No egos on the mat," but I think that applies throughout the business. And the other one, which I'm sure isn't deliberately placed near accounts, is "Don't be a dickhead." Which is probably not a phrase that will make our coverage in the morning, but I think it's a really strong message and a nice way of saying, to behave properly and responsibly and to do the right thing as you go. And it's good to have these reminders, particularly when they're in very big letters in front of your face. Well, just on a different point, Matt, touched on earlier about the education system. How do we in the Midlands make sure that works as well as it can, whether it's from school to employment, university into employment? How do we make sure the right conversations are taking place?
I mean, it's not an easy solution, is the honest answer. But just now you've broken the PG nature of this webinar, Alex, then in the first version of our culture guide here at Oxbridge, we had a phrase, better a hole than an arsehole. And that was all about making sure that people fit the culture. I would rather have people I would rather have an empty seat than, someone who's potentially toxic to the business. And I think, ultimately people will rally together and they'll fill that gap. So it's gone now, but we've replaced it with something a little bit more eloquent. But I love I've had the tour of the Gymshark place as well, and I love the fact that it's all written on the walls because you can't forget it. You can't, and that's part of my inspiration for why we've got neon around the building as well. Skills. So again, it goes down to responsibility, and I think there's a big piece these days that look, we've all employed someone. We were talking about it earlier. We've all employed people that aren't ready for work. They have got they've got the CV. They're just not job ready. And that could be something as silly as eye contact or knowing how to shake someone's hand. And especially during COVID, we've had 2 years of school leavers that, they've not experienced that office environment properly. So when we're taking on, younger generations, one of the first things we do is spend a bit of time with them and actually help them learn those life skills. And I think schools are starting to cotton on to that now. I think there's a few schools that are actually getting it. And actually, I went to a school a couple of weeks ago, and I was greeted by one of the pupils who looked me in the eye, shook my hand, and said, "Welcome to this school." And I thought, fantastic. This is what we need, really what we need. I think for me, the biggest thing is there's not enough industry involvement through the process. So not so much with when we're in those formative years, but when we're getting later on in people's studies, I think people need to have, there needs to be a closer time with industry. And we're getting there slowly, but it's really important that that's influenced. What we need as good employees needs to be developed before they arrive to us. And yeah, we take some responsibility for it here as well. It's important that we mold and develop people into our culture. But I think there's a requirement for people to be more job ready when they leave education. And there's a lot of work to do there.
Emma, what's your experience with that? I was going to use the word interface. I will avoid using that. But obviously, law students have their eye on law firms for when they finish. But for everybody else and for the wide range of opportunities there are in the professional services world that aren't necessarily being a lawyer, being an accountant, how do you go about attracting the right talent?
We spend a lot of time with these people before they join our business, definitely. So they have assessment centres, interviews. There's an awful lot that is sort of time that is spent, vacation schemes. So before somebody's given a permanent position with us, they would come and spend a fortnight in the business and actually work alongside the lawyers to see if they are the right fit for us and we're the right fit for them. Sometimes we're not. It is really a two-way street on that. But it is, you do get some people who just haven't had the exposure, they haven't had the experience yet. And obviously that's been ramped up with COVID because all of the sort of learning by osmosis, so all of the how you behave in an office as opposed to how you behave when you sat on your sofa in your living room is totally different, and if you've never seen it and experienced it, you don't know how to act or you don't know what to say, and that's to be expected but can also be worked on, and there is something to be said for spending more time in the offices around that. And it's also for training, it's better if you sat near people doing the same thing as you, because you do, lawyers spend a lot of time on the telephone. You'd never guess, but you do obviously overhear how they're interacting with their clients, and that's how you learn. So it is really important, but it's not a challenge we can't overcome, definitely.
And Lee, you mentioned at the start about wanting to be able to get people around a whiteboard. How do you balance the, I suppose one of the things that the last 18 months have kind of suggested is that idea of anyone from anywhere can work anywhere else. Do you feel there's a tension between the people who might naturally come and work for you and might be looking at London agencies or American agencies, or is that more talked about than done?
Yeah, I don't think I've necessarily seen that happen on the ground. I think there's lots of talk about it and the opportunities that it gives, but I think what I've seen, and I'm the eldest in the team at 36, and then everybody else is a lot younger than me. And I think what we've sort of seen is actually the younger ones, the sort of early 20s, are actually much more preferring being in the office all the time. So actually they want to get rid of that being sat at home. They want the sort of routine of getting up and going to work in the morning, spending a day in the office with everybody else and sharing what's going on. Because those of us remember when we used to have water coolers in the office that you could touch. You used to literally catch 5 minutes around what was going on, and that's how you actually get to understand people and you build those working relationships up with people from different teams in the same office. And you don't get that sat at home, and you certainly don't get that if you're working for an agency down in London remotely. And I think the other thing I've been keen to sort of consider with all of this going on is that if you're constantly working remotely, right or wrongly, I think people will easily become overlooked because they're not seen, they're not known. As we'll see over the next few years, how many of those people that have chosen to sort of sit on the sofa for 5 days a week then potentially risk being overlooked for role progressions and things like that. It shouldn't happen, but I think it will happen, and it's an accident of spending not the time that you would do as part of that working life. And you see it in law firms, and you see it in accountants. I mean, I'm a qualified accountant by background. It was about, you had to be seen. That's how you progressed your own role, and you sort of took your own career path in your own hands at that point. And you were talking to the partners at the water cooler. You were doing all the sort of stuff to be seen and to be known. And unfortunately, I think what we've got right now is potentially a risk where we're going to have people losing out on opportunities because they're not in the right place at the right time.
That's great. I think, unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, so I'll just put the same question to each of you. And I'll start with you, Emma. What's the one thing you would want a new recruit to grasp on day one, regardless of what level they're coming into the business at?
Interest. They need to be able to listen and hear and take in what everybody around them is saying. So it's really the sort of, from a skills side of thing, it's the emotional intelligence really is what you need. The actual clicking the buttons on my side of thing, I can teach somebody that, but I can't necessarily teach them to get to the root of a problem and find a solution to it.
Great. Matt?
I think I second that. For me, it's about just being a decent human. I think that comes through the recruitment process anyway. But being a decent person who is interested, who's passionate about what they're doing, and is really keen on self-development as well. And someone that's going to take an interest in the business and help us grow something. I'm more than happy to spend all the time in the world with whoever it is. It doesn't matter where they're from, what their background is, nothing like that. But coming along, being a decent human who's interested in helping the business along and is interested in doing some cool stuff. I think that's most of the battle. And like Emma says, you can teach the skills.
Great. Anne-Lee?
Yeah, completely agree with what both Emma and Matt have just said there, actually. I think for me, it's about somebody that come in, they want to progress themselves, they understand exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the difference we want to have, and that ties nicely back into sort of that disruptive culture of what we're trying to be. And therefore, actually, as long as they come in and they want to hit the ground running and just enjoy it, that's the main thing as far as I'm concerned. I don't want people to come to work and hate it. They want to come to work and have fun.
Just one very quick example for me. So I met someone who was fantastic yesterday. They ticked every single box. I didn't have a job for them, but I'm going to make a job for them. That's how good they were, and I need them working for Oxbridge.
Yeah, that's great when a candidate kind of really likes the fire in you. Well, that's been great. Thank you, Emma, Matt, and Lee, for your contributions. I will go away and think about prickly teams, about the role of the translator in between creatives and techies, and also I think from Emma how innovation can be a great part of a career development, even if you don't quite know what route it will take for the next 16 years. So thank you very much for being part of this discussion. And to everyone else, I hope you enjoyed the discussion and took plenty away from it. You've probably got time to make a cup of tea or head to the networking area for a few minutes before our next session starts on harnessing the 5G force, where I'll be back discussing the role of 5G in technology and how that can be transformative for the Midlands. So hopefully see you there starting at 12:30. Thank you.